Let's turn to Ukraine now, because President Zelensky has again reshuffled his top military team after last week's controversial sacking of his defence minister. More on that in a moment. But first, have a look at these pictures from inside Russia. Ukraine has hit Russia's biggest online retailer, Wildberries, the second time in 4 days. It's a hugely important logistics hub, which President Zelensky said was providing the Russian army with drone components. The company is at the heart of the Russian consumer economy, so important to the public and important too to Vladimir Putin. Well, back to the sackings, though, because today President Zelensky dismissed the head of the army, Oleksandr Syrskyi, after the fallout with Mikhailo Fedorov, the defence minister who was fired last week. That, you may remember, led to mass protests in several Ukrainian cities. Well, if Fedorov was young and tech-savvy, Syrskyi was more of the mould of an older Soviet-style general. So that's some of the backdrop. Let's start this sequence by hearing from Paul Adams, our correspondent in Kyiv, on the turbulence at the top of the military.
The choice that President Zelensky had to make, in his own words, was between one of two men who simply couldn't, in his words, sit in the same room together, his defence minister and his commander-in-chief. He chose to side with the commander-in-chief, the older, as you say, sort of Soviet military-trained general, as opposed to the young, innovative, 35-year-old dynamic figure of Mikhailo Fedorov, a man credited with driving so much innovation in the Ukrainian military. That, in the eyes of many people in Ukraine, particularly younger people, was a terrible mistake. And that's why we saw people coming out onto the streets for 6 days in a row. It wasn't just popular pressure, though, that led to last night's decision to get rid of General Syrskyi. That was, I think, the result of days of protracted and long, lengthy discussions among senior leadership, including senior levels of the military, among whom Mr. Fedorov had a certain number of allies. And that is why at the end of this process, you have one of those allies, Mihailo Drapati, emerging as the new commander-in-chief, a man much younger, much closer to Mihailo Fedorov in age and outlook. And I think that is why probably the sense of crisis generated over the past week is now easing.
Well, let's go live to Kyiv and speak to Alexander Kara, who's a former advisor to Ukraine's defence minister, now CEO of Centre for Defence Strategies, a Ukrainian think tank. And thank you so much for being here with us. I'll talk about those strikes deep inside Russia in a moment or two, but to give me your assessment on more sackings today, the turbulence at the top.
Well, I believe it was the right thing to do to change the top military leadership, because there were some troubles with the trust in these people. And now we have almost perfect teaming of the top military leadership appointed by the president. Now we are waiting for his final decision with regard to the candidate on the position of the Minister of Defense. It's highly likely that the acting minister, who is the almost he's world famous guy because he was behind the spiderweb operation and many other things, and including the deep Russia targeting. But anyway, this Fedorov thing has not been solved yet. President is trying to propose him some advisory role, and yes, Fedorov is not ready with that. But anyway, the commander-in-chief of defense forces is highly respected among the military and civilians. He is pretty young, 44 years old. He is a war hero. You might seen the footage from 2014, and when he was a tank in one of the infantry vehicles getting into Mariupol and captured by the Russian forces. So he is a hero. He is open-minded. He is human-centric. He is tech-savvy. He wants to have more unmanned systems deployed on the battlefield with aim to save Ukrainian lives and to achieve our goals. Yes. So it's a good decision by the president.
Let me ask you about those strikes inside Russia, the Wildberries plants. What do you make of that strategy? Because President Zelensky talks about it being the long-range sanctions strategy he has for Russia. What do you think of these latest strikes and targets?
Well, the Russians are not going to stop unless they are not capable of prosecuting this war, and that's why it's so important to undermine the resource base for their aggression, and that's why we are targeting Russian tankers, oil refineries, energy infrastructure, and now retail hubs. And actually, the Russians started to target Ukrainian post services and logistic companies since the beginning of the war, so it's sort of a retaliation. This company is one of the leading in Russia. It provides the military with ability to buy drones and dual-use components for them. Certainly, it employs huge amount of Russians, and it's good that Russians suffer from this war, because before that it was a sort of a shooting range. They've been killing Ukrainians, destroying our cities without feeling the consequences of their actions of silent or active support of the war.
Really briefly, can I ask you just a final question? Because the hope would be that these moves deep into Russia, you mentioned the oil facilities as well, will force Putin to actually negotiate. There is the potential too, it puts him in a corner and he escalates even further, isn't there?
Well, he has no cards to escalate because no, he has been using all available tools against Ukraine. And actually, we forget to mention Crimea. Isolation of Crimea is going to be a huge blow to Putin and poses him with the political dilemmas with no good options to go out. And we are pretty good at that.
Well, listen, we have to leave it there. Apologies, it's so brief, but a really significant day there in Ukraine. So thank you for joining us live on today's programme. Thanks for your time.